them in. Here they come. I'm going to mute all, Amy.
All right. And all right, welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are very excited to share the CalAPA Cycle 1 assessment and set of rubrics with you today, and we are looking forward to our conversation. With that, I'll just turn it to Gay Roby to say hi real quick, and she'll turn it over to Lori, and we'll get started. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, and this is Gay Roby. Welcome to our meeting today. We hope we give you some insights that you can use with your candidates and faculty.
Thanks, Gay. And so before we get started, we want to give everyone an opportunity, assuming a lot of you may already have access to the Cycle 1 assessment guide. If we have any folks who may not have access to the guide, we want to give you a moment here to go ahead and download that. You may want to have a copy of it on the side, so if you want to take notes. So I am going to put in the chat window a link to the CalAPA faculty resource page. I'm going to do it again because it had just scrolled off the screen. Hello, everyone. At any rate, if you go to that link, and I'm going to show you on the screen where that takes you for anyone who has not been to this site before. This is the CalAPA faculty resource webpage. Hopefully that is what is displaying now. Maybe Amy or Gay, you can confirm.
Yes, it is.
Excellent. And so scrolling down midway on the page, there's a section called Assessment Materials. And if you open that, there's a link to download a zip file, and that is a zip file of all 3 assessment guides.
And Lori, before you move off of there, 2 above it says acceptable supports, which we will be referencing later today, just to note where it is.
All right. Once you download the zip file, it is password protected, and so I included in the chat window the password in order to be able to open any of the materials in that zip file. And so contained within that zip file are PDF versions of all 3 cycles, and also all of the templates for the assessment. And with that, I will put the slides back up. Are we back to the slides?
Yes, we are.
Perfect.
Yes, we are.
All right.
All right, so we're going to start by just reviewing our agenda with you so that we are all aware of how we will spend our next 2 hours together. We have welcomed you, and we will go through introductions quickly here of the facilitating staff. We will talk a little bit about our online webinar norms and ask all of you to hold to the norms. We will then move very quickly into looking at our assessment guide for candidates and the rubrics, and walk through each of the 4 steps and the rubrics and provide some tips and suggestions for support for candidates as we go through them. And then we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back together and then get even more specific with additional tips for supporting your candidates as you help them move through through Leadership Cycle 1. And then we'll talk about how to access all the materials again, just to make sure that you are well aware of all the materials that are available to support your work with candidates and other faculty. And then finally, we'll talk about additional program supports that are headed your way later this fall. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And yes, thank you everyone who is putting their name in the chat. It is really helpful to us to see who is with us so that we can kind of keep track of who we are supporting. So thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance yet, if you would please put your name in the chat, that would be great, and your affiliation. All right, so I'm Amy Rising, the Director of Performance Assessment, Policy and Development for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and I'm joined by my colleague, Gay Roby.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar and the deep dives for Cycle 1.
And James Webb is actually off working on some other project work, so unfortunately won't be joining us this afternoon. He's the primary consultant working on the special education CalTPA with me, and we are getting ready for a meeting later in September. But these are our pictures that Gay so kindly found on the internet so that you all can get to know who we are in person. And with that, we'll turn it over to Evaluation Systems to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to the CalAPA Deep Dive for Cycle 1. I'm Mary Murray Autry, the Senior Area Director for Evaluation Systems and located in Sacramento. So I want to thank you all for taking the time for being with us today. Also joining me from Evaluation Systems, and you've already heard from, is my colleague, Lori Thornley. Lori, would you like to say hello again?
Hello again.
Thank you, Lori.
All right, so we're going to move on and introduce our next facilitator, Keith Myatt. Keith joins us from CSU Dominguez Hills. He says he's retired, but I've observed him working pretty hard over the last many years with us. So he's semi-retired, let's put it that way. And we are happy to have him join us. And there is his beautiful photograph, so you can all know who Keith Myatt is. Keith, would you like to say hello?
Good afternoon, and I'm also here on behalf of my my team, which is also Delia Estrada from LAUSD and Letitia Bradley, who works in Santa Barbara. And I would also like to make a pitch that when an opportunity comes up to be an assessor, it's a good gig, and it serves a very vital function in making sure that our candidates get assessed in the most cogent and intelligent way possible. So if you have any thoughts about it, any of us would be happy to talk to you about becoming an assessor and letting you know when those opportunities are going to arise in the future.
Thank you so much, Keith. So let's continue on. We're just going to pause for a minute and talk through our webinar norms. We will be together for a couple of hours today. If you have not had your microphone muted, please do that. I believe Lori actually muted all of you. When we are getting to Q&A time and you would like to speak verbally, please unmute so you can speak, or let us know that you want to speak and Lori will unmute you. We will respond to questions periodically through the presentation, but we do want to remind you that we have office hours in addition to these webinars we offer. Those are every single Thursday morning, and we offer an hour for induction program / CASC programs, as well as an hour for preliminary programs. And just in case you don't know, on Wednesday, late in the afternoon, we offer office hours directly for teacher candidates and leader candidates. So they can call us directly if they have questions on Wednesday. And we would like to ask you, please, to pose questions that are related to the current topic of the agenda today that we are covering, so that we can kind of keep ourselves organized. We know you may have many questions, and we are happy to answer all of them. We may stay later to answer some, but just it would be helpful to us as facilitators if your questions could be related to what we are discussing. Also, so easy these days when we're on Zoom calls to multitask. We ask you to stay with us and be present for 2 hours and make sure that you're not going back and forth and doing other things. We know you're busy, but we will take a break, and then of course we'll be wrapping up at 3 o'clock. And also, as we are engaging with each other through the chat and through speaking, we would like you to honor participants and presenters by moderating your own participation and making sure that everyone has an equal chance for their voice to be part of the conversation. So with those norms, let's go ahead and move on. And I'll turn it over to Gay, and Gay will get us started.
Thank you. We thought we would put the cycle 1 into context of the entire CalAPA performance assessment, so providing you with a quick overview. There are 3 cycles, 3 leadership cycles involved in the CalAPA. The first one deals with analyzing data, and our goal is always school improvement and promoting equity. We take very seriously, as you will look at our preamble in a minute, about training equitable leaders, and that is woven throughout all 3 of our cycles. Leadership Cycle 2 is about facilitating a community of practice. 3 to 5 colleagues join a candidate to work on a school improvement or a student well-being project. And the third leadership cycle is supporting teacher growth. So a coaching session, not assessment, but a coaching session in helping a teacher examine classroom practice and improving upon that. In each of these cycles, we have 4 reiterative steps. We start at the top with investigate, move over to the right with plan. Step 3 is act, and step 4 is reflect. And those happen in all 3 of our cycles. Those 4 steps are in all 3 of the cycles. So moving on to the next slide, we wanted to give you some tips about introducing cycle 1. We like to say, train a child in the way they should go. It's also true for candidates, that the contents of the cycle are presented in the assessment guide that Lori just showed you the pathway to obtain. And these 3 ways are very different for our very different purposes. The overview gives you the 10,000-foot level. And then following the overview is an evidence table that lays out the entire process in table format. So you can see the step, what is included in the step in a bulleted form. And then the third column is the evidence. What are the things the candidate will be turning in as part of their submission? And then that is followed by a multi-page step-by-step guide, including call-out boxes that give you some real important tips in how to move along. So find creative ways to cover the material. Have the candidates read individually for the overview. Maybe make them create a colorful poster for the evidence guide. Break out into small groups to outline the steps for everyone else who is in your chat. Just provide something hands-on so they get used to what is in the cycle. And for additional tips on the next slide. As I mentioned before, there are blue call-out boxes, or there might be green, throughout the assessment cycle pages. And these add illuminating details. It really does help candidates to, I always say, put clothing on the mannequin model. It helps understand them in real life terms. So spend some time discussing those contents as you walk through the cycle with them initially. And then there are some, this is a rubric-based scoring system. Many of our candidates don't know what that is. So take some time to introduce that. What does it mean to be scored by a rubric? What's the difference in levels? Why is it a continuum and not a rubric, or a rubric not a continuum? And then things like the essential question. Talk with them about what that is. Many cases we use the word and, other times we use the word or, and that's very important for them to realize the difference. The pieces of the rubric that we'll get to, called a construct, help them define that and get to know that term. And then finally, we provide very informative information at the footer of each rubric that is also worth spending the time to look at and review with your candidates. Next slide, please. And then throughout this session, Keith, as our lead assessor representative, will be walking you through a graphic about building the submission. And here it is all put together, but just so you know, it's sort of our woven thread throughout the 2 hours together to help you understand the larger picture. Keith, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oftentimes with this whole process, we have 3 cycles, and then we break it down to 4 steps, and then we break it down to levels within rubrics of each step. And sometimes we lose the kind of the 10,000 foot view. And this is what we're looking for as we read these submissions. And I'm sure many of you have read many of these. And when we see that thread and that building block, it makes it easier for some candidates see it much easier this way. And then the people that do it bit by bit are able to see the whole thing when they have this kind of a reference for themselves. So we'll be talking about this a little bit later.
Thank you very much. So we'll start by looking at our assessment guide's first initial pages. So if you've downloaded it, you might want to bring that to the forefront, or if you have printed it off, turn to our beginning part of our cycle, and I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you, Gay, and thank you, Keith. All right, so we are off and running. We will be pulling up the actual candidate assessment guide that candidates receive when they go to the online system and register and pay for the cycle. They then receive this assessment guide. In addition, this assessment guide, as we showed you, is available to you as faculty and instructors who are supporting that ever important growth and development of your candidates when they're coming through your programs. So everyone has access to all of these materials. And today our goal is to walk through this guide with you and carefully explain the steps. There are 4 steps in cycle 1, and then we'll unpack each step and get into sharing best practices with you about how to support those candidates as they move through cycle 1. So the assessment guide begins with a preamble that we'll take a look at. Then we have a table of contents, of course, and then we have that overview that introduces what the cycle is about. So Lori, if you'd like to go ahead and pull up the guide, we'll get started.
All right, we will turn off the slides and bring up the guide.
So while Lori is getting us settled, please, as you do have questions that are topical here as we move through, please start putting them in the chat and we will try and respond to you as we go. And like I pointed out in our agenda review, we will stop periodically for Q&A. So this is what the guide looks like. Hopefully all of you are familiar, but if you're just joining us in this work, this is important for you to recognize what the cover page looks like. And you can see that we have our title here. And what's important is down here in these red letters, notice it says version 03. We promised years ago that we would not let this assessment system just sit and be the way it was written the very first time, because as all of you know, in instruction and in good teaching and learning, we learn all the time about how to clarify our directions, our words, line up our guiding directions with our rubrics, etc. And so we have continued to edit this assessment guide each year of its implementation. And so this is important to see that we are on version 03. And as we tighten things up, as we move forward together as a learning community, you will see versions that come later. So just an important point there to always look on the front cover to make sure you are in fact in the current version. And in this operational year, we are in version 03. So go ahead to the next page, Lori. Now, for some of you, this may be very small, which is why we asked you to print it out, but Lori will make it bigger for us so that we can actually see the text. And then another strategy is to put your chat away so that your screen is bigger. And so hopefully you can all see this. Of course, it's always helpful once we walk through a webinar to go backwards and read the materials, but we do hope you have it in front of you and you can make notes to yourself as we go along, or you have it pulled up on your monitor screen, you've downloaded it and you can make notes to yourself. We do always like to pause when we're talking about our assessment guides and point out the preamble that was created and is here and it shows up in the front of each of the 3 CalAPA leadership guides. It also is posted in the front page of the TPA, the California Teaching Performance Assessment, and is important for us to pause and note this comment about equity and culturally responsive practices. That's what we are expecting to see, that California leaders recognize, respect, and utilize each student's strengths, experiences, and background as assets for teaching and learning. Then goes on and talks about the CAPE and the reference to all students or all TK students. And it is widely inclusive and references all students attending public schools. Students may exhibit a wide range of learning and behavioral characteristics, and we provide several of those. The most important thing is this last sentence, perhaps. This inclusive definition of all students applies whenever and wherever you see the phrase all students and used in the CAPE or in this assessment guide or in the rubrics. So again, just wanted to pause and draw your attention to this preamble and the importance of having this foundational set of ideas front and center for our candidates as they come through our California preparation programs. So let's keep going. Table of contents as promised. Acknowledgements. Many educators across California have worked together for years to develop this system. So it was truly developed by educators for educators, and it is being implemented in programs across California now, in all types of programs. And we appreciate so much all the educators that have given us their time and expertise as we have moved through this development process. We can keep going. All right, so now we're coming into the overview that Gay chatted about. And what this overview does is lay out for the candidate kind of at that highest level what the intent is, or the underlying foundational expectations for this leadership cycle. Again, notice 4 steps, starting with the investigation of the one school site that a candidate is working with to complete the cycle. That is one school site. They start with investigating what's happening at that site. Based on that investigation, guided by a series of prompts, they then go on and prepare a plan of action. They take action then on that plan of action, and then they reflect in that 4th step about what in fact happened. What did they learn, and how does this apply to their own development as an equitable leader? So the other thing I want to point out is whenever you see a blue word that's underlined, if you were to put your cursor on that link, it would take you to the glossary that provides the definition for that word. So let's keep scrolling through here. And we come to this pyramid, this upside down triangle that takes us from the broadest perspective down to the point of work that we will engage in with the candidate. And again, I keep saying engage in with the candidate because candidates should never do this work alone. They should be working with faculty and instructors, with others, knowledgeable others at the school site at which they are doing their work, and they should be engaging with you about their work and being able to have a knowledgeable other read their work, provide critical feedback, and ask clarifying questions, extending their thinking, and of course, working with peers to look at each other's work. It's a collaborative effort, but at the end of the process, the candidate is responsible to submit their own work and to sign an attestation that it is in fact their own work. So here we have the graphic in front of us, and you can see how it lays it out for the candidate. We are starting at this highest level here. I keep trying to make it bigger and I keep messing up with my cursor. So the candidate is going to start by choosing a California state indicator. And of course, these are provided for each candidate at the Department of Ed website, but they include chronic absenteeism, suspension rate, English learner progress, graduation rate, academic performance, and then college and/or career readiness. They will choose one of these indicators to take a closer look at. They will then come into conducting a quantitative data review, and we'll get into the specifics as we go along. They will then, based on that quantitative data review, data from the Department of Education, they will select and other data, other quantifiable data is also something we would encourage them to take a look at. They would then select a student group from these data sets, 3 years of data, and then they would collect and analyze qualitative data to back up the finding the quantitative data is showing them. And then they will move on based on that data analysis of both quantitative and qualitative data. They will determine an equity gap that they're seeing in that data set or data sets. They will identify a student group, and then they will identify and discuss potential contributing factors that might be leading to this equity gap for this one student group. They will develop a problem statement. Then they will identify strategies to address the problem statement, share that with stakeholders and get feedback, and then finally reflect on that process. So then we give them a short explanation of each of the 4 steps. We have our first call out box here. So this is what these call out boxes look like, which provide additional information for the candidate. As Gay said, it's the dressing on the mannequin. I've never heard that analogy, but it's a good one. So these call out boxes just provide a little bit more information to the candidate about what the expectation is at that point in the assessment guide. So let's keep going. We will be walking through each of these steps. Here is the evidence table that we shared with you and discussed. And so quickly, we're just going to show you how this is laid out, and then we're going to enter into step 1 and carefully go through what is expected of the candidate. But this evidence table is actually fits all on one page. It starts out here in the left-hand column with the cycle steps. So step 1, investigate. The middle column speaks directly to the candidate about what they are to do in this step of investigate. And then on the far right column, you see part A. It tells you what is the evidence the candidate will be creating to submit in regard to step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. So as you look at the table, you can see what follows step 1, of course, is step 2, plan. Again, what the candidate needs to do, and then followed by part B, which is a written narrative. Step 3, act. Again, what should the candidate be doing? What is their evidence? Again, part C is a written narrative. And then finally, step 4, reflect, where the candidate steps back and reflects on what they have learned by engaging in steps 1, 2, and 3. What is of interest here in step 4 is that the candidate can choose to write their reflection to us or create a selfie video recording themselves verbally responding to the prompts. So they can write or they can verbally respond. The verbal videos that we do get for this are very enlightening. It is really quite something to watch a young administrator, an early in their career administrator, talking through their reflection on their practice. So they have a choice there of either writing or responding verbally. And again, we'll get into the details of this as we move along. So let's keep going, and I'll turn it back to my colleague Gay, who's going to start us off with the detail around the first step of investigate. And Gay, you will want to unmute.
That's where I was going. It was off of my slide page. So looking at investigate, starting with page 4 where Amy was talking before, your first left column talks about the investigate step. It calls it out and says that there's a template provided for in the ePortfolio system that will be used by the candidate for this submission. So the 5 bullets that are provided on page 4 are followed up on pages 5 through 11 with detailed information, but this is a synopsis of what they are: investigating the mission, the vision, mission, and goals for your school, and documenting their findings. At the second step, to choose a California state indicator, excuse me, of interest. Again, you're going down that pyramid and narrowing it down. So after you have selected or the candidate has selected an indicator of interest, the state indicator, then they're going to collect data. First of all, quantitative data has to be for 3 years. It can be one source, but 3 years. In this time of COVID-19, we did not collect data in the spring of 2020, so it may be data that is earlier than that and can be used as local data if that is a possibility. The fourth bullet is then after they have the quantitative data and analyzed it, then they identify places where they can do 3 data sources around the qualitative resources, delving down, finding out a little bit more about this area of need at the school site they have chosen. And then finally, based upon the qualitative and quantitative data, they will conduct an equity gap analysis for the student group. As Amy mentioned before, the evidence in the 3rd column or the right-hand column is delineated for the first time this year with Part A, Part B, and Part C. So hopefully the letters identifying the parts will help with navigation amongst all of the pieces of the submission that candidates do. So you'll see that for step 1, there's only one thing, it's Part A. And you are to included in that one thing are both data tables and a written narrative about the quantitative and qualitative data about the equity gap. So they are allowed 5 pages of response to the prompts, and then the tables are above and beyond those 5 pages, so they don't count in the 5 pages themselves. As I said before, in step-by-step, more detailed information is available on pages 13 to 15, but we're going to take a look now at page 12. I take that back, it's going to be page 12. And like Amy, I have one on the side that has a little bit bigger font rather than what Lori is showing. So this is before the rubrics that follow this page, and it lists the rubrics per step. So you will see that in step 1, we have 3 rubrics, and what is presented is level 3. It is called the essential question. It drives the rubric content and what the candidate should be addressing in that part of their submission. So in rubric 1.1, it says, based on the California State Indicator, how does the candidate select and analyze quantitative data across 3 years, and then delineates about their analysis? Do they identify patterns and trends related to equity? Do they choose a student group? Do they relate their analysis to the school's vision, mission, and goals? Step 2 then goes on to the qualitative data, rubric 2, excuse me, and does the candidate explain the relationship between the quantitative and the qualitative data and how it relates back to an equity issue with their chosen student group. So you'll see all of this begins to tie together. Rubric 1.3, how does the candidate conduct an equity gap analysis? Does it inform their understanding of the equity issues for their chosen student group? So to put a little bit, moving down to one of the rubrics just to show you, the essential question is at the top of the rubric, but it also is repeated in a statement form rather than question in level 3. If you look down at level 3, there is a statement and then a page return, line return, and then a second statement. We call each of those statements constructs. If there are 2 constructs, both of them must be addressed in a submission. So it behooves the candidate to really look at the difference between those 2 and then check back on their submission to make sure they have addressed both of those as well. And then at the bottom, you'll see for this rubric, we are addressing CAPE Standard 1, elements 1A and 1C, and then reminds the candidate again, you're going to be submitting Part A, which are tables and narratives. No more than 5 pages of response narrative, then your tables are outside of that 5 pages. So to talk a little bit about the lessons learned and how to approach this, we're going to turn it over to Keith. to talk about investigate tips and considerations.
Sorry, I was in the middle of typing a response here. Say what you just said again, to me. I was trying to type a response.
Sure. Oh, to talk about a little bit of what should go into a narrative, what should you keep in mind as a faculty person?
So what we're looking for here is when we look at the data at the beginning, that should indicate to someone that there is some inequity somewhere. And the reason, the first thing that they're being asked to find is the mission, is that we're really asking them to go through an exploration here. So do you know find the mission of your school, and then, and all you need to do is state it. And the response I was putting back to Susan was, you're right, sometimes the schools don't have a printed mission vision statement. So things that we've seen are they went to the districts, which is fine. Another one that I've seen, which worked very well, was the principal outlined kind of what their vision and mission was as they thought about their vision for the school. And so they got the vision of the school's direction from that interview in the qualitative data. So once we've done that, we're asking to look for trends and patterns that surface some inequity. And hopefully the inequity is in fact, not hopefully, the data needs to refer back to the mission and vision of the school, because that's where the inequity is, that's the nexus of the inequity. If we say that we think all students can and will succeed and meet grade level standards, and we have a certain group that are not, then we hope that you will see that, and then you'll move forward. Then what we're looking for is specifically which of these California indicators are you focusing on, and what student group. So of all the pages that are in the guide, from my perspective, the page that Gay just showed you with the rubrics on it, really the rubrics are what you're going to be assessed by. And if I were to think about planning backwards, I would think about looking at the rubrics and making sure that everything was covered within them as you think about creating that job. As an instructor, our job is to help them with this process. Basically, it's an action learning process. I'm sure many of you have seen that, and you teach action learning specifically. ASCD has a wonderful little booklet on action learning. And so as we take people through this process, they identify the mission, they identify the gap. Once they've identified the gap, the qualitative data then emerges from the gap. So if you find a gap for EL students in math, then the next thing you need to talk to are their teachers, the math teachers, about how and where do you see this gap? What's exacerbating this gap? What are some strategies that you've used? Get smarter about the gap. The qualitative and the quantitative data build on each other, so that there's a through line of the mission to the qualitative analysis, which surfaces an inequity, to you going and speaking with people about the inequity and what they can and should be doing about it. Something that does come up, people in the rubric, it talks about collect a range of appropriate qualitative data. A range of appropriate qualitative data does not mean that they have to have 3 different qualitative methodologies. It means you could have it all just be interviews, but it needs to be 3 interviews with 3 different people. Of course, as an instructor, I would like to see them apply the work that they did in their research course and use different methodologies. But as an assessor, as long as I see that there's a range of either who they're interviewing or what it is they're using as a methodology, both of those things are just fine with me. Anything else you want me to kind of go through with that? That'll get you to the that'll get you to this point of building a coherent narrative for rubrics 1 and 2.
Keith, did you want to speak to the data sources during COVID?
So is that mine? Okay. So COVID, of course, has created all sorts of interesting ways to go here. So what we've asked people to do, or what we're looking at, and by the way, we went through COVID has made everybody jump through and be thoughtful and creative about, and we've done the same exact thing with all 3 cycles, thinking about what are all the ways that people are demonstrating this. And the assessors and the lead assessors have been involved in a long process in making sure that we're responsive to how people have to do this work differently. So we're looking at people who are using more data that they gather directly within their school. I mean, it's easy to go to the state data and start looking for these things, but what we found is that many people are using site-based data, teacher-generated data, which over 3 years gives us good indications that they're doing the work of research. Sometimes, so now things are done, they're observing a Zoom conference, or they're doing their conference, they're interviewing the principal or the PTA president or whoever they're doing their qualitative work with. It's done the way we're doing this meeting. So we're looking at different kinds of data sources at the school and being creative with that, and making sure that people get credit for meeting the requirements of the CalAPA, even though they're not using maybe statewide data or the traditional forms of data that they've been using in the past. So online records, reviews, if you wanted to have a group, then that again is an online thing, so we can do that observation using that, observing lessons online that are being done online, you know, kind of lurking and watching that. So and the point is that we're looking for 3 years of data, and they can use 3 years prior to COVID. That will still bring them the practice of doing the investigation, looking at the data, and doing the data analysis that we're asking them to do as they develop their the cycle 1 responses. So we're looking for more and more creative ways that people are meeting the requirements of CalAPA, especially in all 3 cycles, but we're always looking for how, and we're sharing strategies for how people are meeting these requirements, even though they can't do things face-to-face, or the school may not actually be in session.
All right, are we ready to move on to step 2? You're on mute, Amy.
Yes, let's go ahead to step 2.
All right.
And we can, though, there are a few questions here. Maybe we want to pause and answer so that they're not, since they are specific to step 1. So most of these questions here are all around data. What do we do because COVID interrupted our data sources? So what we were pointing out on that slide in that blue text was that, yes, they can go back to 3 years prior to this COVID year 2020 and use those 3 years. Keith pointed out many different ways that they can find quantitative data at the school site. That is also appropriate to use. And I think hopefully that answers those questions. The reason we need 3 years, at least 3 years of data, right, is we're looking for longitudinal trends. We want to see patterns over time in data sets. If we're not seeing it over time, it may not really be an equity gap that needs to be addressed right away at this point, because we don't have real deep data saying this is a problem that has existed and we're seeing it over time, and now we need to go find our qualitative data to back up what we're seeing in the quantitative data. It's important for candidates to know that there are 2 types of data: quantitative data, qualitative data. It's important for candidates to realize that they can build instruments and collect qualitative data at a school site, and that might shed additional light on what's going on around a potential equity gap. So it's important for the two data sets to have a relationship to one another, and to also, as Keith said, dig in deeper, learn about what's happening at the school site, and use different types of data to help you understand that. Multiple measures that lead to an equity gap that then the candidate would go on and think about how to address. So with that, let's go ahead and move on into step 2. Step 2 is planning. So in step 1, they've done their investigation, they've looked at their data sources, they've considered what the data is telling them, and they're moving here into step 2, which takes a look at the first step in step 2 plan is institutional and structural factors. So the directions to the candidate speak to the equity gap that they've conducted and the quantitative and qualitative data they have collected. And the candidate is asked to determine institutional and or structural factors that could be contributing to the equity gap they identified. If potential contributing factors are not clearly indicated based on the data collection, collect more data, ask more questions, try and get to the bottom of what could be producing an equity gap. And review the relevant research. Many of these equity gaps are tied to research that's been conducted for years, and there may be some insights the candidate can gain by taking a look at that literature around an identified equity gap. We ask the candidates to be mindful of any bias they may personally bring to an identified equity gap, to a particular group of students, to an issue, and to be careful to make sure that they are aware of the bias and that they professionally set that bias aside. We all have bias. We all need to learn to recognize our own bias, and we need to learn how to set it to the side when we're doing our professional work. Series of questions are provided for the candidate here in this step 2 plan. What potential contributing factors are suggested by the data for the student group at your school? Remember, this is work done at a school site. Second question, how do these specific contributing factors, including institutional and or structural, impact student learning or well-being for the student group? Academic or well-being. Then we ask the candidate to cite that research that's related to their findings regarding those contributing factors that may have created or added to the equity gap they identified for the one student group. And finally, question 4, we ask the candidate then to identify areas of educational need related to the single equity gap. So they're looking at one equity gap for one group of students, and to discuss that in their written response. The next thing the candidate does once they've thought through that, those 4 prompts, and done some writing in consideration of their analysis of their data from step 1, they move on and then prepare a problem statement. And the problem statement should culminate from their data collection and equity gap analysis. They may have identified several potential contributing factors that they think are impacting that equity gap. Some of those factors might be larger societal issues. Others may be related to specific practices at the school. They need to sort of sort through that, perhaps get some stakeholder input and feedback. And they need to select from the areas of educational need they've identified for that one group and that could be addressed at that school. And out of that, they need to develop one problem statement, right? So we go on, and we found over the years that lots of people interpret problem statement in different ways. So we have provided a call out box and provided a definition that the candidate needs to understand and then respond to as they prepare and then submit their problem statement. So our definition is, it has become this: a problem statement is a clear, concise description of the issue that needs to be addressed by a problem-solving team, right? As equitable leaders, we are always working with others. So as a team, it is used, this problem statement, to center and focus the team at the beginning of the effort and keep the team on track during the effort, and is used to validate that the effort delivered an outcome that solves the problem statement. So we want to establish a problem statement. We want to establish addressing that problem statement. We want to look at those findings, and we want to make sure that we're moving towards solving it, not just admiring the problem. So that is step 2 in the plan. It's all about understanding, thinking about, deliberating on what could be those institutional and structural factors that are leading to this equity gap. And they're going to write a written narrative for us that is no more than 5 pages and submit that. And then that brings us back then to see if you have questions about step 2. And then we need to hear from Keith again about what he's been learning in his role and other ideas for supporting candidates through this important step of identifying those structural and institutional potential factors.
It's like working 2 different things here at the same time. I'm reading the chat as well as trying to focus here. The what we're looking for here is as a teacher, one of the things that people have is they can get rather insular within their classrooms, and their view of the school is rather limited because of the fact that they're focused on their main responsibility, which is their 30, 40, 180 kids that they have to focus on. Now we're asking them to take a leadership perspective of their school, which means they need to begin thinking about the culture and the political structures and the way and why things get done in their school. So what we're asking them to do is to become more aware of that by beginning to identify the contributing factors that are affecting the item that they've identified in those students. So the mission says, we think all kids should meet grade level standards, and we're going to support everyone in an equitable way. I found some data that says that isn't quite occurring with mathematics for EL students at my school. Now I've spoken to some people, usually the principal is one of them, and a counselor and a teacher, and maybe there's some other people who have specialties in these areas. And I've spoken to these 3 people, or I've gathered this data, or I've observed these classrooms, and I've noticed that there are a number of things here which seem to be contributing to this. One of them is all of the courses that these kids need are only offered one time during the day. If they spread them out throughout the day, or if they provide it in classroom. So you see, they have to begin to think about what are the contributing factors here. Another kind of factor are those factors about the attitude about these children. Well, I don't teach those kids. I've been here for 20 years and that's not my job. So they surface bias issues, and that becomes an important thing here as we think about what are the contributing factors. Why is this data the way it is? So the continuation of this narrative surfaces ideas, hypotheses about why it is that these things are the way they are. So that are affecting this data set with these particular students. So after we've gotten to that point of identifying some of these factors, and by the way, the submissions that we've been getting recently do a wonderful job of keeping the narrative going of, I found these contributing factors, 1, 2, 3. And then as they move forward, they continue with that structure of these contributing factors I'm addressing, 1, 2, 3. And then when we start looking at the problem statement, they continue with that structure of these are the issues that I've surfaced, 1, 2, 3. Now, a point about, and I'm so glad that Amy read you the definition of the problem statement. A problem statement is not just, boy, does my stomach hurt. A problem statement includes, yeah, my stomach hurts, and I'm going to go to the store, and I'm going to go get some Pepto-Bismol, and I'm going to take it, and I'm going to hope I feel better. And when my stomach ache goes away, I'll know the Pepto-Bismol was successful. So it's not just boy, do we have a problem. It gives us a sense of, are we getting closer to solving this issue? And have we indeed solved this issue to anyone's satisfaction? So when I think about a problem statement, something that's helpful to me is something called SMART goals, because it helps to define what it is, what we expect to happen, what we determine to be, are we getting closer to success or have we been successful? So when we think about writing, thank you. So when we think about writing a problem statement, just stating, well, I found this problem and I talked to some people about it, that is not the complete problem statement. We need to see that something exists, we're going to do these things, and when we get close to success or when we are successful, then we can say that this is what's determined it. So what we're looking for in rubrics 4 and 5 is something that is aware of what's going on in your school. So you're aware of the context and the contributing factors. One of the things that we started off with was you actually had to kind of be real clear about structural factors and institutional factors. What we're looking for now is contributing factors. What is it that you can tell me about why these problems exist? And then eventually we hopefully get to the point with the problem statement of, and these are the things we're going to do about it, and this is how we're going to define progress and success.
And then Keith, going back a slide, well, the one that's displayed now, Lynn asked if you would speak a little bit to institutional versus structural and the need to differentiate.
It's difficult because what we're talking about here is we're talking about flour and eggs here, because what we have to do as leaders is we have to parse out those institutional factors and those structural factors. But at the school, it's just all mixed up together. It's a commonly held value, norms, and belief. In the high schools where I worked was the teachers who have been there the longest get the easiest jobs. All seniors in one prep. Well, what does that become? Well, that turns into an operational structural factor where AP courses are not taught after lunch. So there are things that we know that are embedded within the culture that eventually become the way we do things, the way we're actually going to do these things and how things get built. So in institutional factors, they are the things that people believe. They're the values, beliefs that manage and come before decisions get made about what the best thing is to do. Some of these have them baked within them inherent bias that has become the way and as we know, the culture becomes very difficult for people to know about. It's very difficult. I remember reading a submission once where the person started their career there and was now a coordinator. They'd spent their entire career in that one school. And my sense was, in reading it, was that they really were, the things that they thought were normal, they were kind of invisible to some of the practices that had emerged there. So the idea here is that there are the values and beliefs upon which we see practice. Those things become structural factors, and those structural factors wind up being things like the master schedule, what we celebrate, who gets rewarded and who gets not rewarded, policies and procedures. And one of the things that many schools are doing now is they're going back through some of their policies and procedures to see where do they come from and are they indeed equitable. And those equity audits, we've been involved in a few of them in our cultural proficiency work. And people are amazed at the things that are embedded in policy that were the institutional factors that became structural factors. Is somebody reading am I answering the question, Gay? Well, I haven't read the chat.
Yeah.
Yes, she did add a follow-up question. So a problem statement has to define steps 3 and 4?
Define,
Says, does this problem statement have to define steps 3 and 4?
I'm not sure what the question quite is, but
I
what
agree.
you're asking is the problem statement identified in step 2 then is acted on in step 3 and reflected on in step 4.
Oh, I see what
The
you're
answer
asking.
is
Yeah,
yes.
thank you, Amy.
Yes.
Yeah, there needs to be a through line here. We're talking about everything from the qualitative to quantitative, the qualitative data to what factors, both institutional and structure, are responsible, and what are you working on, and hopefully that's what we're going to be addressing.
Right. So good. So let's and Joe, I see your question. So we'll come back to that when we get into step 3. Maybe it will get ironed out for you, but if not, let us know. And what we need to do though is remember what we are measuring in step 2. So we do want to take a look real quick at our rubrics for step 2. If you want to pull up that page, Lori, for us in the leadership assessment guide, just where we see all the rubrics together.
While we're waiting for that, I do also want to point out we acknowledge in the design team that everyone in a program has a reading list of a bibliography for the program. And so we were looking for numbers of ways that people could demonstrate the readings that they were doing in your preparation programs within the CalAPA. And this is one of the places where that's explicit. We are looking for, and you can't get a 3 without it, research that is directly related to your to the gap, to the indicator, and or the students specifically around what it is that that you're going to be working on. So absent that research, there isn't it's going to affect what level you get assessed at.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always just so important to ground our work in the research, isn't it? So let's take, actually I wanted to look at the essential questions chart, Lori, just to point out we have 2 rubrics in step 2 for planning, for measuring that candidate's capacity to plan. The first one is focused 1.4 on how the candidate determines contributing factors, including institutional and or structural, that created or added to the identified equity gap, affecting, again, one student group, and cite the research supporting their determination. That's the first rubric, essential question. The second rubric that we use to look at their planning capacity is rubric 1.5. And in this rubric, we're looking at how the candidate is able to use the equity gap analysis and identification of potential contributing factors to develop a feasible problem statement related to student achievement. And again, remember, and or well-being. It can be either achievement or well-being. So 2 rubrics there, the first around contributing factors, the second around that equity gap analysis and factors to determine that problem statement. So that is what we're measuring in step 2, plan. And that moves us to step 3, and I'll give it back to my colleague, Gay, to take us through step 3.
Actually, before we do step 3, we're going to do a 5-minute stretch break. So go back to the slide deck, perhaps, Lori, to say it's 2:05 on the nose right now. So we'll come back with you at 2:10. Take this time to, first of all, mute your microphone. Make sure you are muted. Might want to turn off your camera as well, and we encourage you to stand up and stretch, and then perhaps go fill your coffee cup or your water bottle. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And we'll see you at 2:10.
Yeah, so we'll see you all back at 2:10. Thank you so much. I'll put the time in the chat in case you forget.
Welcome back. It is 2:10, so we're going to ask Lori if you will proceed back to our assessment guide with step 3, ACT. If you look at the page 4, the table, the evidence table, you'll notice that there is a template for step 3 that candidates will be completing. And there are 3 key bullets that we're going to go in depth on page 10 in just a second. They're a strategy, feedback, and adjustment. So we're going to go there on page 10. All of step 3, ACT, is encapsulated on this one page. That first of all, they're going to rely on previous work. All of these continue to build and work upon what currently is happening, what you have done previously in order to move forward. So based on that equity gap analysis that was done at the end of step 1, we're going to narrow down and talk about your problem statement and identify some potential strategies. Here, potential is the key word. They don't have to select a specific one to implement. This is one that they think perhaps might work. And then the second thing they do is to solicit targeted feedback. Usually it is their supervisor, their principal or assistant principal, someone who is then knowledgeable about the area that they are investigating, and ask for feedback on their current plan. Is it appropriate? Is it feasible? What would we do about improvement within our educational realm? How many stakeholders would be involved? What resources would it need? And so based upon that feedback, there are 5 questions on the template, and it's real important that candidates realize it is not helpful to go to someone and say, yeah, great idea, that'd be wonderful, bye, because they really need to respond to feedback of quality and depth and also adjust their plan, because the number 4 is describe the feedback. How would you adjust your proposed strategies? And then number 5 goes on to ask, how would you get buy-in from other stakeholders at the school level or community level? And then you'll see the evidence to be submitted is again a written narrative, this time part C. And part C is no more than 5 pages. So they can go to great depths about their strategies, the feedback, and then how their plan would be adjusted for feedback, as well as how they would create buy-in with key stakeholder groups. In moving down to page 12, you will see the rubrics for step 3 ACT. There are 2 of them. The first one deals with, are the strategies proposed well informed by the equity gap? Are the proposed strategies aligned to the school's vision, mission, and goals? So weaving it back around to step 1. The second rubric, 1.7, talks about, does the candidate apply feedback? And do they talk about buy-in and potential implications if this strategy would be moving forward, which in this case does not have to be the case. So turning it back to Keith to talk a little bit about putting the dressing on the mannequin. What have you learned about implementation of ACT? Did we lose the Keith? Is he muted? Maybe he took too long of a break.
I'm not sure if he's back yet, Gay, but we can talk about what we've learned in his absence till he returns. We know that our candidates struggle a bit with this whole notion of getting feedback. And as Gabe pointed out, the intent here, right, is to really build up this appreciation and understanding that an equitable leader is working with stakeholders, is not functioning by themselves. They're not directing so much as facilitating cooperative learning groups and working together with stakeholders to make good decisions, appropriate decisions for a school site. So of course, then to model that, we ask the candidates to please take their thinking forward to a stakeholder and get that important feedback. And as Gay said, they don't, for them to go to someone who just says, oh yeah, that's great, is not really what we're looking for. It's not what's helpful to the candidate. They need to spend enough time with a stakeholder who really will engage with them and give them some good sort of tips and strategies and direction around, we've tried this kind of strategy before in an equity gap to address an equity gap, and it really didn't work. So here are some other ideas you might consider, for example. Or sometimes I think we see candidates making assumptions about finances, like, oh, we'll just hire 3 more people, or we'll just bring in some kind of external program that costs, $1 million. Well, the school site doesn't have that kind of funding, right, Gay? So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
For it to be feasible really does require them to talk to someone who is more in the know, who has some administrative experience, be it their direct supervisor or someone in the district office, to bring it back online and on track kind of a thing for the candidate. And then the second thing that question number 5 addresses is buy-in. And what we find with the buy-in piece is the few that I have read, I'm not anywhere near how many Keith has read, is this is one that's often fluffed off and can be dismissed. Oh, they'll just buy in, right? And instead, number 5 really asks for some thinking about how will you go about convincing teachers this things need to happen? How will you get parental buy-in? As well as what are some implications? If you do this step, what are some roadblocks you might see in the future? What are some potential implications of doing this?
Great. So again, we encourage you to put your questions into the chat, and I see that Keith has returned. Keith, we were just pausing for a minute, here at step 3, and Gay and I shared some insights we've gained when we've read submissions about candidates' challenges, but would you like to add? We talked about how important it is for them to really seek out that feedback from stakeholders, and then also to think and provide that written narrative response around, what are the implications perhaps if you take action on this equity gap? What might you run into? What challenges might you face? So do you want to add your thoughts here for everyone?
Again, one of the things that we're working here, and when we think about the people who are in our programs, they are teachers. Some of them are also coordinators or teacher leaders, but that's the minority, who are learning to get a broader, bigger view of their school. So what I think about is, do you remember in Harry Potter, I forget which movie it was, and there was a map where it actually showed the little footprints where people went? That's what I want these teachers to do. I have a picture of my campus, and I want to see their little footprints going all over. I want to see them going talking to the principal. I want to see them talking to the PTA. I want to see them. I want them to go around and get a sense of who they need to build relationships with in order to begin addressing this issue. Leadership is relationship building. And so our not so subtle attempt at trying to make sure that that happens that they represent that in their submissions is this part of the submission. So we want to know, who are you building a relationship with? Who are you engaging in helping you to address these issues? What we're not looking for is, I rode my horse in, I shot I used my 6 guns and I rode my horse out and the problem is solved. No, it's not. So the idea here is, what can you demonstrate to us that you're building relationships, maintaining relationships, and if you want to get a better score, tell us how you're planning on continuing to have predictable communication with the people that are addressing these issues. What are you going to do in the future to regularly build capacity and relationships with the people who are going to help you address this issue? So that's the frame, the mindset of what we're looking for specifically when we talk about rubrics in step 3, in rubric 6 and 7.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Keith. So let's go ahead then and wrap up with our 4th step, step 4, reflect. And if you're in the guide, this is presented for you on page 11. You can read along here. But again, this 4th step is that big step backwards to really reflect on practice. So again, I just want to remind everyone that the candidate has the opportunity to respond in writing or to respond with a video recording of themselves. We have 3 prompts, and prompt 3 has 2 parts. So the first question we ask our candidates to reflect on is their work in this cycle. So the work that they engaged in to look at data, both quantitative and qualitative in step 1, how that resulted in that consideration of factors, and then how that turned into a problem statement, and then how in ACT they sought out that feedback and then perhaps revised and understood what was potentially feasible and what challenges they might face in their school site as they dug in to work on that equity gap. So that's the first question. And our question in there is around, how did you identify, analyze, and understand the potential factors for that California State Indicator equity gap identified for that one student group at this school? So the second question then leads them into reflecting on what they've learned about equity-driven leadership. What have they learned? And how does understanding those factors, both the institutional and or structural, including social, economic, or cultural, how are those factors contributing to this equity gap at this school for this group of students? And how does that influence your ability to provide at the school site that equity-driven leadership that is so important? The third question asks them about their reflection on their ability to conduct a data analysis and determine an equity gap, to write a problem statement and determine strategies, gather that feedback, and adjust those strategies. So the first part to 3 is analyze your strengths and areas for growth in addressing equity needs for a group of students at your school, And then the second part, based on the analysis of your experiences in cycle 1, steps 1, 2, 3, and now really 4, identify specific professional learning goals for yourself and describe next steps you might take for growth. So those are our prompts. Again, they can write up their response to us, or they can create that video. We have one rubric for step 4, reflect. And that essential question is right there at the bottom of our table on page 12. How does the candidate reflect on and summarize what they've learned about equity-driven leadership in cycle 1, and how, based on the school context, they might address a single equity gap for one group of students at the school? How does the candidate use this learning to identify strengths and areas for leadership growth? So brings it full circle. And you can think about that graphic on the front page, right? Investigate, plan, act, reflect. Comes around full circle for the candidate. So again, we're going to come back to you, Keith, for any additional insights you might want to offer about how our candidates are reflecting on their practice.
John Dewey said that we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And that the idea here is that we are asking them now to think about their thinking in terms of what did you experience as you went through this this part of the process. So, when I think about this as a coaching question, as I think about you coaching the candidates, I'd recommend that you begin with this phrase. As you think about being an equity-driven leader, make that the first thing they think about. As you think about being or you think about what you learned about being an equity-based leader, then start talking about, summarize what it is that you did here to deal with some of the contributing factors. The focus needs to be here, not on their ability to gather data, but why do you gather data? Most of the problems and the frustration that we've had with this particular rubric is that we get a lot of information about what it is they did with the data. And when I look at the question, it begins with, reflect on and summarize your understanding of the factors. But if we start with, as you think about what you learned about being an equity-focused leader, what did this process provide you? What do you understand differently now in terms of the contributing factors at your school that led to these issues and eventually to your problem resolution? So that's the best thing I can tell you about this. We're really looking for equity-focused leadership. I mean, I think when you look at the evidence for a level 2,
Next slide, Lori.
really outline this well for people who aren't doing this well. And that is, do they demonstrate a limited understanding of the role of an equity-driven leader? Do they provide limited insights into the importance of stakeholder feedback? And were there strengths in areas that are not related to equity leadership? If you tell me that, yeah, one of the most important thing I can work on as an equity-driven leader is I need to get better at analyzing qualitative data, you've lost me. Because the reason we do these things and the level, we're trying to get at why you're doing this thing. Many of us in our course programs have an ethics course or something that's related to Capsule 6. That's the focus of this particular rubric and why we're asking people this. So start with, as you think about yourself as an equity-driven leader, what did you learn? And tell us about your thinking. Tell us about your experience. Tell us about what you were thinking about and what frustrations you had as you approached the teachers that didn't want to work with you. That's what we're looking for here. So is there somebody who might read the chat for me here?
Thank you, Keith. And what you see on the slide in front of you is from San Diego State University's work, and they have been really willing to share all of their work around, in particular, equity-driven leadership thinking. And this just provides how they have used their words to describe equity-driven leadership. These are leaders who conceptualize schools as complex organizations composed of networks of dynamic and interdependent thinking components. And these are leaders who pursue school change and improvement, particularly through systemic change and capacity building. And finally, these are leaders who create and articulate a shared vision of a school as a place where all students, and we paused on our preamble, all students are fully engaged, inspired, and empowered, and all of the students' voices are heard. So important in equitable leadership work. So with that, let's keep going. We have more to share with you. I'm checking our time. We have about half an hour left together. Hopefully now you have a good sense of the 4 steps of cycle 1 and the essential questions that drive the rubrics that we use to make score judgments about candidate submissions. So we wanted to move for a few moments into looking at our rubrics together. We want to think about how these analytic rubrics are structured. What is the approach to use these rubrics? And then finally, understanding how they're formatted and the information that's provided in the footer, how that information is important for candidates and all of you who are supporting candidates to understand. So let's take a look at the next slide, please, Lori. Here is a picture of one of the rubrics. Each of the rubrics in cycle 1 and in cycle 2 and 3 all have 5 levels. And each rubric has an essential question that drives and explains what we're measuring in the rubric. You can see an earlier, so there's our essential question. Thank you for the arrow. I think if you hit return, we'll get the next arrow. So these are our 5 levels. Level 1 is the level in which we do not have evidence, basically. So the candidate has an equity area focus that is not one of the California areas of focus, or there's no data patterns or trends identified, right? Or the candidate does not present 3 years of data. So this is important. We need that longitudinal data. Or the candidate does not relate their selected equity issue to the school's vision, mission, or goals. They need to do that analysis of the vision, mission, or goals and relate it to their selected equity issue. They must align. They must align. The school is what the school is. It has a vision and mission. The data that they're looking at needs to come back around and map to that vision, mission, and or set of goals the school set for itself. So if those things are not happening, there is no evidence of the evidence presents these types of responses, the candidate will end up as a score of 1, and that is the lowest score on the rubric. Level 2, the constructs there typically are responses that are minimal, that are limited in nature. So here in this case, the candidate selects an equity focus that is not one of the indicators, but they are able to identify patterns or trends across 3 years of quantitative data. So they're kind of partially doing what was asked, or the candidate's not clear about which student group they will investigate. Candidate superficially relates their data to the school's vision, mission, or goals. So that it's not a clear response. It's a minimal response. Things are not aligned or tied together. Things don't make sense. That's often what we see in a level 2. The candidate's attempting to respond. It's just not meeting what we need to see in their response, which is what we present always in level 3. The level 3 set of constructs always responds directly to what is asked for in the essential question, and it is in fact the level of performance that the design team was hoping to see from an entry level candidate. So the candidate in level 3 does, yes, they do select a California state indicator, and they analyze quantitative data across 3 years, so important. They identify general patterns and trends related to school equity and choose a student group, one student group to investigate further. So they are providing the evidence exactly as we've asked them for it. Finally, in that last chunk of text there, the candidate makes clear connections between their analysis and specific components of the school's vision, mission, and goals. Again, we ask them to do that. They have done that. It is clear that candidate can now be at a level 3. One thing to understand about these rubrics is to be at a level 3, which is the level we start at when you're looking at submissions, is that all constructs, evidence has to be present for all constructs in level 3 for it to receive a score of 3. If the candidate doesn't provide that evidence to us, for example, in level 3, let's look at the last one again. If the candidate doesn't make clear connections between their data and their components of the school's vision, mission, they forget to do that, they don't tell us about it, we don't see that clear connection in their response, they're now no longer a level 3 and they drop down to a level 2. We then go through the process again. Has the candidate presented the information of the constructs in level 2? If so, then maybe they're a level 2. If something's missing, they drop down to a level 1. Now, what's so important here as well in the way we train our assessors, starting at level 3, if all components of level 3 are evident, now as an assessor, we need to say to ourselves, do we have evidence of level 4? And you can see at the top of level 4, it's a little different. It says all of level 3 plus what's here in level 4. And that's also then how you get to a level 5. The candidate must marshal evidence. We must have evidence to leverage against this rubric that is all of level 3, all of level 4, and all of level 5 to get a 5. So that's very important to understand, and these rubrics really should be woven into your courses, reviewed, discussed, used by candidates way before they ever submit anything to the state for scoring. So next arrow brings us down to looking at this bottom section of the rubric. Now what we have here is the CAPE that is being measured by element. So you can see here in this rubric, it's CAPE Standard 1, elements 1A and 1C. And then source of evidence. This is what the assessor uses and only uses to make a judgment of the evidence against this rubric for a score. So you can see here the source of evidence for this score for this rubric is Part A, data tables and written narrative, data collection and equity gap analysis. And you can see also what's included there is how many pages of text we can have for the response. So that's just a little insight into how our rubrics are laid out and how rubrics are used. What the essential question does, right, establishes what we're measuring. Level 3 explicitly tells us what needs to be seen and demonstrated in the candidate's evidence. If we have all of 3, maybe we're a 4. If we have all of 4, maybe it's a 5. If part of level 3 is not there, any part of level 3 is missing, they're now a level 2 and perhaps even a level 1. All right, let's keep going.
Amy, we're to the questions and answers part, and we really are caught up in the chat. But if you are out there and have another question you've had sitting in the back of your mind, if you'd put it into the chat real quickly, we will spend a few minutes here. Here's the first one, Amy. Where do we find the California indicators?
On the California website.
It's part of
and they're listed in our guide, and they're even listed in the rubric. So in the guide, we try to be extremely clear about these 6 indicators, and it helps just narrow for the candidate what is we are looking for. So here they are: chronic absenteeism, suspension rate, English learner progress, graduation rate, academic performance, college and career readiness. These are the 6 indicator areas where data year after year after year after year in California have shown us equity gaps. And the Department of Education and all of us educators in California want to make sure that we are taking into account these very chronic areas where our students are struggling. So those are the 6, and that is where we focus the candidates in their work here for cycle 1. And the data, you know, for the school site would be found on the California data dashboard.
And that's the only question that's coming in.
Additional quantitative data can be used as well. Gay, go ahead.
We're up to date. That's the only question. Just come in if you want.
All right. Well, let's keep going then so that we can cover all of our slides.
Well, thank you. I'm going to talk about a little bit about tips for completing cycle 1. We talked earlier about introducing it, now bringing it back to we've gone through all of the steps. We have done some instruction and work with our candidates. So now what are some good ideas about producing quality submissions? So first of all, candidates must continue to provide at least one quantitative data source across the 3 years. And we've talked earlier about the COVID-19 interrupting that as well. So the 3 years could be the prior 3 years, 2016 through 2019. It can be local school-based data or district data. So there are other ways to find that information. Again, as we said earlier, it is about what they do in development of their leadership skills and knowledge, not so much the data that is given. Secondly, our candidates must continue to provide at least 3 qualitative data sources. While their on-site observation might not be happening anymore, qualitative data can still be collected. Think about electronic surveys, an online focus group discussion, and even a one-on-one interview with key stakeholders from the school site they are working with. And then thirdly, candidates must continue to solicit feedback on their proposed strategies. So they might think about obtaining and setting a phone or a video conference with their supervisor, with parental consent, maybe even record for future reference if it's someone who you need permission to have on video as well. And then some insider tips for moving on for preparing and checking cycle 1 before they submit it. We have a document we pointed out for you earlier in that resources page called Acceptable Support. Things like you can't tell them what to do, but you can sure ask them leading questions. So first of all, consult that document to know that you are not overstepping your bounds when working with a candidate and you adhere to the submission rules that are there. Provide dedicated time for candidates to share draft submissions with other candidates for peer review. If you're meeting online and using Zoom, use some breakout rooms, put them together in triads to let them discuss their submission, look at it for each other to see if the pieces are all there and if they're strong enough to see, yes, it meets a rubric 3 or better. Secondly, schedule a coaching session with candidates. The coach can ask reflective questions. It can encourage the candidate to reflect upon the strength of their submission and consider this, but you cannot tell them what to do or what not to do. Moving on to the next slide, you might provide locally designed reflection guides. We have them out there. Several were shared at our implementation conference. So if you ask around with other program directors, they will probably be able to point you in a direction if you don't want to do your own. But this will help the candidates to look at making sure everything has been addressed. Can they mark the check boxes? Lori, can you go to the next slide? And to check the strength of their own narrative. And then finally, provide opportunities for candidates to check it against the rubric criteria. It says this in the rubric 3. Where in your document can you show me where you addressed this as part of your 5-page response and submission? And then however much we plan ahead, there are some folks who do not receive passing scores, and programs are asked to remediate with them. So what are some thoughts on remediating? Allow your candidate both time and opportunity to vet. They're going to be upset they did not pass. They're probably going to say that it was all our fault, not theirs. Just give them time to express those emotions, not passing a cycle. And then together, alongside them, work with them to just deconstruct their submission, looking against the rubric constructs. Perhaps you encourage them to find a peer who would give them insight, find places for them to edit, or once again, design some kind of a reflective guide to help that candidate objectively walk through their submission to see if they have hit all of the parts if perhaps one is off target or some is not of strong enough reflection. And there, we've got an extra bullet there. So anything else that you can think of that would be appropriate as well would be very nice. Keith, you're on screen. Do you have something to share with us?
The only thing I would add is get a collection of your submissions from your own candidates and begin using and sharing those and using them as, for those people who are comfortable with that. Get their permission and have some real live ones, and they have a range of real live ones in order to help people get clear about what level these different ones are at. And the other one is, for those, and I know a lot of you have gone through this, it's a coaching conversation, not a supervising conversation. It's as you think about it, use that document as that third point to have that conversation around. As you look at this and you look at the rubric, what differences might you have? And then if you have to get into consulting, offer a number of choices about things that they might have considered. Well, had you considered the data from the parents? Had you considered looking at another student group, or had you thought about looking at that? Of those three things, which of those things do you think might have been helpful for you before you had submitted? So thinking about just being keeping that coaching frame, and you'll be in good shape as far as acceptable use.
Thank you very much. And then Lori, want to move to you with assessing the materials?
Yes. So again, just wanted to remind everyone, the materials you all, or many of you probably went to find those materials earlier. They are located on the CalAPA faculty resource webpage. I recently just reposted that link in the chat window because that happens to be also where the acceptable support information is. So that website becomes your go-to web page for all things CalAPA. Again, the assessment materials are contained within a password protected zip file. We've included that password in the chat window. Included in that zip file are PDF copies of all 3 assessment cycle guides, a complete set of the templates for all 3 of the cycles, and a document called the CalAPA Updates document. We haven't had any updates yet this year, so that document is fairly short at this point, but it does include information reminding folks, should we have a version update during the year, that would be documented within that document. There is an email address there. That is the program support email address for CalAPA. If any of you have any questions later on after today, feel free to contact us and we will get back to you. And also to remind programs that once candidates register with the CalAPA submission system, they also have direct access to the materials through the system. But you are certainly welcome to download and share materials with your candidates, either in print or on a secured platform that your program may have.
We're very happy to tell you that we have a new program support called the Program Guide. Different than the assessment guide. The assessment guide is very much related to how to prepare and submit cycle submission. The program guide is a little bit about anything and everything. It provides information. It has evidence-based practices. It really talks about implementing the CalAPA and supporting the candidates that come through your program. It also has an overview of resources, general and specific information, how to adequately use assessment materials to support your candidates. And it has been found useful for a variety of practitioners, our deans and department chairs, superintendents, directors, CalAPA program coordinators, course instructors, university site supervisors. There's something in here for everybody. I'm telling you, it's a very, very strong document, and very appreciative of the work that has gone on to make this viable for us for this coming year. Amy?
Yes. So we also want you to know that we have, and the question had come up earlier in the chat, so we want to be sure you know where to find these support materials. We have finally been able to post candidate responses to cycle 1, 2, and 3, including all of the written narratives and videos for the other 2 cycles. And you can find them here at the CTC. If they go here, Lori, they will take them to a link to the commission website.
That is correct. A link from the faculty resource page will take them directly to the CTC website.
But it's
Perfect.
so seamless, they don't even know they're going there.
You can use these candidate submissions for educative purposes, to work with your faculty, to use with your candidates, etc. So they are now posted and they are there for you to use, and we hope you do use them. Of course, over time, we'll have to add new ones as performance changes, but we do have 3 examples there for you now to use. And they're provided to coordinators in accordance with a strict non-disclosure agreement. And however, as I pointed out, they may be used and shared with faculty, supervisors, coaches, and mentors, administrators, and candidates as examples of CalAPA submissions that are from the mid-range of the rubric. So mid-range means scores of 2s, 3s, or 4s typically. And they are there for you to use for educative purposes. Next slide. So back to Q&A, and I do see, Lori, that we have a few questions here. One is about where to find the program guide. This is a new resource for you that we just published in its final for now version. And so let's tell them where to find that program guide, because it really is helpful and it provides lots of best practices for each of the 3 cycles.
Yeah, so as we said earlier, the faculty resource webpage really is your go-to source. That's where you can download assessment materials. That's where you can find the program guide. That is where you can find a link to the sample submissions. Anything and everything a faculty member might want is located on that page.
I don't see any further questions, Lori, so would you like to move on to program supports?
Well, I do see one from Joanne. I want to make sure she has what she needs. She needs a login for the site. What is it? She's asking about a username and a password.
Yeah, so the sample submission site is accessible via a different login credentials. Amy, those login credentials have been provided to program coordinators. I think we're trying to keep those to a smaller group of folks. So if you're a faculty member, see your program coordinator. They'll be able to get you access to those materials. If you are a program coordinator and you don't have that information, email, and I'll put it back in the chat, email the CalAPA email address and we'll get that to you.
Thank you, Lori. So we have just a few more slides with you. So back to you, Lori, to go over our submission and reporting dates.
All right. So I think this is the complete list. We have a number of submission reporting dates. I believe we have at least one in every month. And we have a 3-week turnaround on receiving results. So you can see there the first submission window was on August 20th. and the results for anyone who submitted their submission by that date is today. They will have or would have received their results today. And then moving on through the remainder of the 2021 academic year, you can see when the other submission dates are. This information is also available on the CalAPA website on the main CalAPA homepage. So candidates also have access to this information. And also a reminder for those out there who may still have non-consequential candidates in their programs. These are candidates who initiated the CalAPA process during the first academic year. We are coming up on the deadline for them to complete all 3 of their cycles. That deadline is December 31st of 2020. They need to complete all 3 of the cycles. Remember, non-consequential candidates are not being held to the passing standard. If a non-consequential candidate fails to submit all 3 cycles after December 31st, they will revert over to a consequential candidate. And that means that any remaining cycles that they may need to complete would need to be completed as a consequential candidate. That means they would be held to the passing standard. It also means that they will need to register and pay for the cycle. So we really encourage those programs out there that still have non-consequential candidates to get those cycles completed.
We have many upcoming events, ways to support you as program directors, your faculty, staff, and candidates as well. We are repeating this kind of a format, a deep dive into the remaining cycles over the next week. So cycle 2 will be on September the 14th from 1 to 3, as this one was. And then we will do a third one for cycle 3 on September 18th from 1 to 3 p.m. Our virtual think tanks are back for this year. Our first one, our kickoff one, will be on September the 25th. And the time there is wrong. That's the TPA one. Ours are from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And the topic is going to be building successful CalAPA submissions in an online environment. It's being facilitated by Kitty Fortner and Melissa Metz-Hall, both of whom have now extensive experience with doing online support and being a leader in that kind of environment. And I'm looking forward to what they have for us. We have one more faculty workshop that was postponed due to the COVID-19 crisis, and that is happening online. So it will be October the 13th. It is all-day affair from 9 to 3, but because we don't have to worry about seating capacities, it's open to anyone. We always suggest that you bring a group of people together because you will have an opportunity to spend some time thinking about your program in particular and how the information presented affects your program design. And then finally, a results analyzer demonstration is going to happen on October the 19th. This is where we suggest that you bring your results analyzer data, and evaluation systems faculty will help you navigate through that data and put greater understanding so you can have better application with that information. And Amy.
All right, everyone. A few more ongoing supports for you. We are offering office hours every week, as we have for the last several years, for candidates directly. This is our new office hour. It is for candidates. It is Wednesday afternoons from 4:15 to 5.
I think these may not have gotten updated, Amy.
I was going to say, nope, that's TPA.
Mm-hmm.
We do work across both programs, of course. So sometimes our slides get a little mixed up. So our actually office hour for APA candidates starts at 5 and goes to 5:45. And then on Thursday mornings from 8 to 8:50, we invite anyone who's in a CASC program to join us.
And that one's correct.
And that one's correct, oddly. And then preliminary program comes to work with us at 11 o'clock. So we have to admit that this slide is not something you should pay too much attention to, but we will make sure you have the right information. And of course, you can check the PSD e-news every Friday. All this information is provided for you in that resource. We do have monthly virtual think tanks the last Friday of every month. We have one coming up. And then quarterly coordinator meetings, our next meeting for our coordinators. We just had one, have one tomorrow, but then we will have the next one in January and a follow-up one in spring. We've moved to quarterly meetings instead of once a year, just because so much is going on in our world of education that we feel like we need to be available at least 4 times a year for our program coordinators. Next slide. So these are how you can reach us online. We have a YouTube channel, and there are many resources now there that we created over this past spring as we came through our first adjustments to COVID, and we were trying to provide support to the field around online learning and a whole host of other supports. Performance assessment has its own group of video supports, and you can follow and find those at this bit.ly CalAPA for YouTube link, and go here always to find our sessions if you're not able to attend in person. We typically record most of what we do and then post it for those of you that need to go and see it at a different time. Next slide. And that brings us to our last slide. So thank you everyone so much for your patience and support as we move through this presentation. We are hoping that we have met our goal of helping you better understand the expectations for cycle 1 for our candidates, what the evidence is that is required for each of the 4 steps, and the rubrics that are used to measure performance. Please put your questions in the chat. If you have any additional questions, we're willing to hang on. Otherwise, thank you so much. And we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining us. Gay?
Thank you so much for attending, and we will spend some extra time answering specific questions, but we thank you for spending these 2 hours with us.
And we particularly want to thank Keith Myatt for all his expertise and willingness to be with us to share that expertise. Thank you, Keith. And of course, thank you to our contractor, Pearson, and to Lori for being with us throughout this presentation. Thank you.
Hello there.
Hi, Jason. I was
Just a quick
responding.
question about.
Hi, Jason. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Keith. Your background is impeccably designed. You did a great job choosing the virtual background.
Yeah, the cleaner showed up today. That worked out well.